In the shadowy pine forests of northern Washington, where the dense trees stretch as far as the eye can see, Ethan, an amateur filmmaker, set out on his first big project. He had always dreamed of capturing something unique, eerie, and atmospheric, the kind of footage that would make a lasting impact. To do this, he chose the perfect location, a remote cabin miles from civilization, nestled between a thick tree line and an abandoned logging road, a place where time seemed to stand still, untouched by the modern world. Ethan arrived with nothing but his gear and his loyal dog, Scout, a border collie mix, for company. He had planned this project meticulously. The cabin would serve as his base of operations, and the surrounding forest, with its twisted trees and dense underbrush, would be the setting for his film. The days passed quietly, filled with long hours of filming and experimenting with different techniques, capturing drone footage, and composing moody scenes. Everything seemed perfect. But then, things began to change. It started with a faint tapping. At first, it was so quiet, so subtle, that Ethan almost dismissed it as the wind or some critter tapping against the cabin's wooden structure. The tapping would come at night, just as the house fell silent, but Scout would always growl, her ears perked, staring at the window, as if aware of something that Ethan couldn't see. When he would check, there was nothing, no person, no animal, just the quiet of the dark forest. At first, Ethan thought it was the isolation starting to get to him, a trick of the mind, but then the tapping grew louder, more frequent, until one night it changed entirely. The soft taps became scratches deep, deliberate, and unmistakably intentional. They weren't the random marks of a curious animal. These were vertical, jagged, as though something with a purpose and intent had made them. Ethan's heart began to race. Something wasn't right. He tried to stay calm, telling himself it was just his imagination or the wind playing tricks. But the scratches continued, increasing in intensity, and now Scout refused to stop barking. She paced around the cabin, her growls becoming more urgent, more frantic. Ethan thought about leaving, but something kept him there. Something about the footage, about the project he had started, made it impossible for him to walk away. He told himself he could handle it. It was probably nothing, but the fear gnawed at the edges of his mind. The turning point came one morning when Ethan reviewed the footage from the motion-activated trail cameras he had set up around the property. His finger hovered over the playback button as he reviewed frame after frame, showing the usual deer, birds, and the occasional squirrel. But then something caught his eye. In 3 frames, near the edge of the tree line, something moved. It was Talon, naturally Talon, covered in dark hair. But the thing that caught Ethan's attention the most were the arms. They were too long, far too long. And as the creature moved, its eyes caught the light from the camera, gleaming like metal, cold and unblinking. Ethan's stomach lurched. He zoomed in, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The creature's face was not visible, but the way its eyes glinted sent a shiver down his spine. And then, as he looked at the footage, he realized that the thing wasn't just passing by it, was looking directly at the camera. The sudden realization that something, or someone, had been watching him all along hit Ethan like a ton of bricks. The isolation that once felt comforting now felt suffocating. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind raced. What the hell was that thing? Was it human, animal, or something else entirely? That night, the situation grew worse. Scout began to bark uncontrollably again, but this time she wouldn't stop. She paced restlessly, scratching at the door, her eyes wide with fear. Ethan felt his own nerves begin to unravel. The silence that had surrounded him for days now felt oppressive, like the world itself was holding its breath. Ethan tried to calm Scout, but she was panicked, agitated. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, she went silent. Ethan searched the cabin, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. but Scout was gone. No barking, no scratching at the door, just the faintest trace of movement collar lying neatly on the porch. He went cold. The collar, lying abandoned in the middle of the porch, was the only thing left of her. Panic flooded him, but he didn't leave. He couldn't. Instead, he sat in the cabin, back pressed to the wall, hatchet clutched tightly in his hand. His mind raced as he thought about the footage he had seen. Something was out there, and it was watching him. Waiting. The night stretched on in a haze of fear, the silence so thick that it felt suffocating. At 3:13 a.m., the power went out, and the cabin was plunged into darkness. Ethan's lantern flickered before it too gave way to the pitch black. He heard nothing but the sound of his own ragged breathing, and the wind rustling through the trees. Then the tapping returned. But this time, it wasn't just at the window. It was above him, on the roof. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the sound grew louder, more deliberate. A heavy thud followed by the creak of shifting wood. Something was on the roof. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears as he grabbed his camera and ran out of the cabin, filming as he went. The woods were dark, the trees looming like dark figures in the night. He moved through the underbrush, the sound of his own footsteps, loud against the dead leaves. His camera shook as he turned it on himself, breath ragged as he whispered, "I think it's in the trees, watching me. It doesn't chase. It waits. It knows when you're alone. It waits at the tree line." The footage continued, shaky and chaotic, as Ethan pushed further into the woods, his every movement filmed in a fevered panic. His voice trembled as he spoke. "It's out there. It's real." The video ends with Ethan gasping, eyes wide in terror, looking up. The last frame catches a glimpse of something a collar. Scout's collar dangling from a tree branch, swaying gently in the wind. Ethan was never found. But the footage? It surfaced weeks later, mailed anonymously to a local television station. The station aired it once, and the response was immediate. Viewers reported nausea, panic attacks, and a creeping dread that followed them long after the video ended. Some claimed to have seen strange figures in their peripheral vision. Others said they couldn't sleep for days, tormented by nightmares. The station never aired the footage again. No one ever spoke of it. But deep in the woods, in the shadow of the tree line, something still waits, and anyone who comes too close may just find themselves in its gaze. The Howler. Deep in the heart of the Smoky Mountains, where the fog clings to trees like ghostly fingers and the stars peek through only in fractured glimpses, 4 friends, Ty, Jordan, Mel, and Brooke set off on a weekend camping trip. It was meant to be simple, a break, a weekend of beers, bad jokes, and stargazing under Tennessee's endless skies. None of them expected it to become the last trip they'd ever take together. The first night was calm. The group pitched their tent in a clearing surrounded by towering pines and thick brush. The fire crackled, beer cans hissed open, and laughter echoed through the woods. They swapped stories, roasted marshmallows, and argued over constellations. Just as the fire burned down to glowing embers, it came. A howl long, low, and haunting. It rolled through the trees like a wave of dread, prickling their skin. Everyone paused. Ty leaned forward, squinting into the dark. "Probably just a coyote," Jordan offered, forcing a casual shrug. His voice trembled just slightly. Brooke wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. Mel tossed another log onto the fire, trying to brighten the space between them and the dark. But Ty didn't look convinced. His eyes stayed fixed on the forest. "That wasn't a coyote," he said quietly. They brushed it off, eventually retreating to the safety of their tent. But even as they drifted to sleep, the sound lingered in their minds too long, too human. The second night, the wind blew harder. The trees whispered secrets to each other, And the campfire never seemed to burn quite right. Something felt off, like the woods were holding their breath. And then they heard it again, the howl, closer this time. Lower, hungrier. Brooke reached for Ty's hand, without thinking. Then came something else. Laughter. A broken, garbled mimicry of a sound. They all knew Brooke's laugh, but it wasn't her. She was sitting right there, frozen, her eyes wide with fear as her own twisted giggle echoed through the trees. They all stared at one another, hearts hammering. "Who's messing with us?" Mel asked, standing up and spinning around. "That's not funny." The forest answered with silence. Then came the footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. They circled the tent. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Ty unzipped the flap, just an inch, and peeked out. "Anything?" Jordan whispered. "Nothing," Ty breathed. Then, a scream. "Mel." They scrambled out of the tent, flashlights jerking side to side. No sign of him. They called his name, but the woods swallowed every word. They didn't sleep that night. At dawn, they found him. 20 feet from the tent, his body lay sprawled across the dirt. His limbs were bent at impossible angles. His mouth hung open in a silent, eternal scream stretched, far too wide. Around him, in the mud, were massive footprints, each one at least a foot long, 3 toes, clawed. Brooke dropped to her knees and wept. Jordan turned away, pale. Ty just stared, jaw clenched. "We need to leave," Brooke said. "We can't just run," Jordan argued. "We don't even have a signal. Let's try to reach someone. A ranger station. Anything." So they waited. One more night. One more. That night, the wind died. The woods were deathly still. Then came the howl again, louder than ever, echoing between the trees like it was inside their bones. Then it called them. Jugurden. Brooke. Tewi. The voices were warped and wet, like something trying to remember how to speak. Brooke screamed. Ty dropped his flashlight. They huddled inside the tent, lights trembling in their hands. Something brushed against the fabric. A long, slow drag, like fingers. Then silence. Ty snapped. I can't stay here," he said, crawling out of the tent before they could stop him. "Ty, wait," Brooke cried. They heard his footsteps fading into the trees. Then, a scream, short, cut off. Then nothing. Jordan and Brooke didn't speak. They didn't sleep. They sat back to back in the tent, waiting for the dawn. At first light, they didn't bother packing. They grabbed what they could and ran, crashing through underbrush, tripping on roots and rocks. The trail stretched longer than they remembered, winding endlessly through the fog. Every snap of a twig behind them felt like a countdown. They didn't stop until they reached the ranger station, an old, weathered building nestled in the trees. They burst through the doors, breathless, frantic, wild-eyed. The ranger listened. He nodded, called for help. But when they led the search party back to the clearing, there was no sign of struggle. No bodies, no blood, not even footprints. Just the cold ashes of their fire. And silence. Years passed. Jordan never went camping again. He sold his gear, deleted the trail maps from his phone, and moved to the city where the only howls came from sirens. He refused to talk about that tribe either. Brooke tried to move on. Therapy, meditation, group hikes. But on quiet nights, when the wind rustled through the trees outside her apartment window, she sometimes heard it, her name, carried on the breeze. They were never found, Mel, Ty, gone without a trace. But deep in the Smoky Mountains, far off any trail, past the last flickers of cell signal, something still waits. It mimics, it howls, it remembers. And when the fire dies, and the stars blink out, it begins again. The howler. Deep in the folds of the Appalachian backcountry lies a forgotten valley, untouched by time and rarely marked on modern maps. Locals call it Whisper Holloa Place, wrapped in mist and mystery. Most hikers avoid it, not because of the terrain, it's actually rather gentle, but because of the stories. Stories about the air being too quiet, about voices that call out from nowhere, about people who go in and never come out. Locals say the hollow doesn't just keep secrets. It learns you, echoes you, and sometimes it keeps a part of you. Bill Turner never believed any of it. A retired forest ranger with 32 years under his belt, Bill prided himself on logic. Maps, weather patterns, animal behavior, those were his tools. Ghost stories and mountain folklore. That was for tourists. Campfire tales to spook kids. But even Bill knew the woods could be dangerous. People did go missing. He just never thought it had anything to do with the hollow. Until the autumn of 2013, a 24-year-old hiker named Lena Price had vanished while backpacking alone. Her last known position pinged from a trail cam near Deer Ridgeless, then 2 miles from Whisper Hollow's edge. The search parties swept the usual paths. Nothing. No tracks. No gear. No sign of distress. After 4 days, most assumed she'd gotten lost or fallen into a ravine. The official rescue efforts scaled back. But Bill couldn't let it go. Something about it gnawed at him. So one crisp morning, he packed a thermos, a flashlight, his old service revolver, and headed into the hollow, alone. The forest grew stranger the deeper he went. Pines loomed taller than they should have. The underbrush thickened like it was trying to turn him around. But Bill pressed forward. Around noon, he found Lena's camp. It looked untouched. Her tent was still pitched, sleeping bag unrolled, food in sealed containers. Even the little solar lantern was still blinking weakly. Nothing was disturbed, not by wind, animals, or man, except one thing. A ring of stones had been carefully placed around the fire pit, not in a casual way, symmetrical, intentional, each rock smooth, mossy, but warm to the touch. Bill crouched, examined the stones. Something felt off, like the air was holding its breath. "Hello," he called out, scanning the tree line. And then, "Hello." The word floated back, not with the tinny cadence of an echo, but with a tone, a presence. It was a reply. Bill stood frozen, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver. Is someone there? Silence. Then the crunch of leaves. From behind a black birch, something stepped forward. Tall, slouched, humanoid but wrong. Its arms were too long. Its skin pale, almost grey. Eyes glowed faintly in the dimming light, not bright like headlights, but dull like dying embers. Bill raised his flashlight, and it vanished. Gone, like it had never been there. That night was one Bill would never forget. He stayed at Lena's camp, thinking he might wait until morning to hike out. But as the sun fell behind the ridgeline, the hollow came alive, not with animals or wind, but voices. They came softly at first, like whispers threading through the trees. "Bill, Bill, come here. It's okay now. We miss you." He froze. The voices weren't random, they were familiar. His wife's voice, his brother's, even his own voice, calling from the trees. "Bill, look over here." The fire was his only comfort. He fed it constantly, refusing to leave the circle of stones. The whispers grew louder as the night deepened. Once, he thought he saw movement, just beyond the tree-lined shapes that moved without sound, that mimicked deer, foxes, people. But the eyes were always wrong. At some point in the night, the air shifted. He blinked and for a moment, the forest around him looked entirely unfamiliar, overgrown, wild. The stars above had shifted position. The brush was denser, thornier. Trees stood where none had been. When dawn finally crept over the peaks, The voices stopped. The woods looked different again, more like he remembered. But the path out was harder. The way twisted, brush tangled around his boots. He stumbled through it, bleeding and exhausted, for what felt like hours. Eventually, he emerged. But he wasn't the same. Bill never went back to the hollow. He told no one what he'd seen, only mentioned that he'd found Lena's camp, but nothing more. Officials chalked it up to disorientation and fatigue. She was never found. Bill now lives quietly in a small cabin outside the nearby town of Montmore. He speaks little, keeps to himself. But every year, without fail, during the fall equinox, he hikes up to the old trailhead leading to Whisper Hollow. There, he lays a ring of stones, always 12, always the same shape. He never explains why. Some believe it's a ritual, a tribute to whatever's in the hollow. Some say he's trying to keep it contained, like building a wall that keeps the voices from spilling out. Others say it's a warning, because whatever he met in that forest wasn't just mimicking sound, it was learning him, studying, playing with something deeper than voice identity. And maybe, just maybe, it still follows him. Locals whisper now about strange calls on radios, about hikers hearing their own voices when alone, about echoes that don't wait to repeat but reply. Because in Whisper Hollow, your voice doesn't belong to you. It never did. The Black Hills National Forest breathed mist into the morning. Beneath a jagged granite outcrop, two geology students, Casey and Morgan, prepped their gear. They weren't thrill seekers, just curious minds cataloguing rock strata and seismic fractures. But that day, their compass twitched. GPS went dead, and Casey noticed a crack hidden beneath the fallen stone. Smooth, wide, not natural. "Looks like we found something big," Morgan whispered, brushing aside the leaves. What lay beneath would make them question science, time, and sanity. The tunnel yawned wider than expected. Inside, the air dropped by 10 degrees. Morgan laughed it off. "Just geothermal cooling," she said. But Casey's breath caught in her throat. Their headlamps revealed walls unnaturally smooth and glossy like glass, melted and reformed. No echo followed their steps. The silence wasn't just quiet. It was swallowing. Farther in, deep claw marks appeared, jagged and uneven, not scratches, gouges. Morgan leaned in, fingers trembling as she traced them. "Nothing we studied could leave marks like this," Casey muttered. Her voice barely a whisper, yet it felt too loud. The tunnel opened into a cavernous void. Their lights trembled over bone-white circles, meticulously arranged skeletons. Some were human. Others had elongated limbs, rib cages that spiraled unnaturally. Symbols adorned the stone around them, drawn in something like blood but thicker, tar-like. It bubbled faintly under the light. Casey crouched beside a femur longer than her leg. Her fingers hovered above a symbol. "Don't touch it," Morgan warned, suddenly panicked. Too late. The moment Casey's skin made contact, a hum vibrated the cave. Low, primal. Their watches died. Phones buzzed static. Then, silence again, heavier than before, like the cave had swallowed sound whole. A flicker. Morgan's headlamp blinked, then steadied. In the far corner of the cavern, a shape crouched in shadow. Tall, broad, still. The creature's skin shimmered, mottled like oil on water. Tufts of matted hair clung to its shoulders. It blinked not, up and down. Sideways, horizontal lids. Morgan gasped. It turned. Backward jointed legs unfolded slowly as it stood. Its head tilted, sniffing the air. Mouth opened far too wide, stretched to its ears. "Run!" Casey screamed. They turned. The tunnel behind them had warped. Left was now right. The walls pulsed like lungs. Something growled, not loudly, but deeply, felt more than heard. Bones cracked under their feet. Morgan slipped, caught herself. Casey was behind her. Thina shriek. Morgan turned. A massive hand, knotted with black claws, clamped around Casey's ankle. She was yanked backward, her helmet knocking against stone. Casey's scream was cut off not by force, by silence. No sound, not even breath. The creature dragged her into the dark, vanishing as though swallowed by the cave itself. Morgan's lamp flickered. The tunnel twisted. She stumbled forward, bones crunching beneath her palms. Her eyes burned. Everything was wrong. Crawling, blind, Morgan felt her way through shifting walls. One direction, then another. A faint light. She clawed toward it, bloody fingernails scraping stone. The symbols pulsed now, glowing faint red, then air. She tumbled out into the daylight, skin pale, shaking violently, mud-covered, bloodied. She screamed. This time, sound returned. 2 days later, rangers found Morgan near a creek, muttering fragments of sentences. She wouldn't speak of the cave, not to police, not to her parents. But she drew. Dozens of sketches, the creature with oil-slick skin and sideways eyes, the tunnel, the bones. Every image bore the same scrawled title, The Silence Below. Therapists called it shock. Her professors called it a breakdown. But Morgan knew what she saw. Years later,